We are broadcasting live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is the council meeting for the town of Mono, Tuesday, September 14th. This meeting is being conducted by means of electronic participation as permitted by Section 238, subsection 3.1 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended, and the Town of Mono Procedural Bylaw 2020-42. Council chambers are not currently open to the public. This meeting can be viewed live as well as viewed at a later date on the Town of Mono portal. Residents can join the council meeting to ask questions and to observe. I'm wondering if we could establish that we have quorum. It appears to me that we do. Any or interest can be declared at this point or any point in the course of the meeting and must be followed up in writing. We would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the town of Mono resides within the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Teotante, Adirondack, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples. We also acknowledge that the town of Mono resides within the treaty lands named under Treaty 18, the Nottawasaga Purchase of 1818. These traditional territories upon which we live and learn are steeped in a rich Indigenous history and traditions. It is with this statement that we declare to honor and respect the past and present connection of Indigenous people with this land, its waterways, and resources. I have a motion that council approves the agenda of session 19-2021 as circulated. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Deputy Mayor Nix, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any in opposition to adoption of the agenda for this meeting?
Excuse me, Your Worship.
Yes.
You had mentioned that you might want to add to new business a discussion on the upcoming town newsletter. I don't know if that's still for consideration.
Yes, I would like to add that under new business. And also under new business, I think we were going to talk about the county's vaccination policy, if I was not mistaken.
And that is on the agenda already.
That is now on the agenda. Okay. Is there agreement that we include a very brief discussion of the newsletter under new business?
Okay.
Thank you. Any objections to adoption? Seeing none, the motion is carried. I have a motion that council approves the minutes of sessions 17-2021 and 18-2021 as circulated. Do I have a mover? Councillor Mankalo, and seconded by Councillor Martin. Any discussion of the minutes as circulated? Any opposition? Motion is carried. We have no proclamations for the meeting tonight. Question period. And Fred, do we have a question, anything submitted in writing before I turn to the public who may be viewing?
Yes, we do have one question that was submitted in writing. So this comes from Mr. Anthony Hussein, who has one question, but it's got three elements to it. So he is looking for updates on the following items. Racism in the town of Mono, speeding on the Mono-Angela town line, and he asked about voting centers not being organized and heavy delays in lineups, and I believe he's referring to the federal election on that.
Thank you. Does anyone have any comments in response to Mr. Hussein's questions?
Well,
yes, Deputy Mayor, next.
On the first issue, racism, I don't have anything to offer, but Mr. Hussein should know that our mayor, who has just resigned and left, was sitting on the, I'll get the name wrong, John, but the diversity committee at the county level, and they were looking into that. So unfortunately, we've lost her input on this subject. I apologize, that's not offering much to the question, but it's just suggesting that at least someone on council was involved with that issue.
Yes, I think that's a fair statement, and I believe as well that when we last talked about this, we deferred to the county process, which is well thought out and underway now for some time. I think that that may be the appropriate form for Mr. Hussein to pursue this, and maybe he could become a delegation to that committee as well. As for the issue of speeding on the Mono Amaranth Town Line, it is a continuing topic for the Police Services Board, and we are meeting tomorrow, and it will no doubt come up again. And I think the question with regard to the federal voting advance polls has been spoken to. Any other comments? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Your Worship, if I could, I mean, by the fact that he asked us on his first question about racism, I guess the question mark was off in my mind, because to be honest, I haven't heard any residents bring this issue to my attention. So by the fact he's asking about it, I would turn the question around and ask him, does he have some concern or some evidence that we have a problem, or does he have something that he thinks we should be doing on that subject? Now, I don't know if he's listening, but I do think, why is he asking us where we are on that issue unless he's got some concerns? And I'd like to hear what they are.
I think that's entirely fair. And again, I think the forum for that discussion is appropriately the committee that the county has set up. And if he's dissatisfied with that process, he can again address this to us, but short of examples or suggestions as to how we proceed, it's very, very hard to know how to approach his particular concern without having more detail. Are there any members of the public who wish to ask a question? Oh, Councillor Magdalene. I think you're muted.
I'd like to comment on the second issue, which is listed as speed on the Mono-Angela Town Line. Do we have any evidence that there is a particular speeding problem here? I wonder if Mr. Dunmore can comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Magdalene. If Council will recall, I had a report with respect to the data that was received from the solar speed sign, and the 85% of the traffic was generally driving at a speed of 77 kilometers, which was below the unposted limit of 80, and that further went on to police services. And as the mayor has noted, I think it will continue to be discussed. I don't know if this is so much a matter of counting the speeders as a concern of Mr. Hussein, but there was nothing that jumped out at us that there was a high volume of speeding traffic, and there always will be the odd speeder for sure on some stretch of road.
I'd just add that for Mr. Hussein's benefit, the town has recently purchased a piece of equipment for use by the police known as a black cat. And it's a very sophisticated speed measuring device that also records time of day and various other aspects of traffic flow. I'm going to suggest at some point that maybe the OPP consider deploying it along that stretch of road to finally put to rest the issue of whether indeed we have a particularly acute speeding problem. Any members of the public? Mr. McCrae, I saw your hand up. You're muted. Bob, you're muted.
I think
We
Bob's
still-
probably having the same problem that I have. He may have to reboot and log back in.
Bob, did you hear that suggestion? You may have to log out and log back in. Okay. Yep. Any other members of the public? Mark?
There was a Mr. Justin Decote on earlier. I think he's still there. He's put in the chat, hello, I'm wondering if there's any follow-up for my question from a few weeks ago regarding overnight street parking in well-lit residential areas with roadways wide enough to safely allow for it.
Mike, any thoughts on that?
So unfortunately, tonight I don't have any feedback for council. I was doing some water grant applications over the last couple of weeks. So it's my plan. I have written down that I owe council 4 reports on speeding, and it's my plan to have hopefully all 4 of them. And this one will definitely be provided some comments with respect to Justin's request at the next council meeting.
Okay,
Okay, can you hear me now?
we can.
Thank you.
Mark, just before we hear from Bob, did you have a follow-up on the parking? Now you're muted.
I was just giving Bob the thumbs up that I could hear him, so.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, I see, okay. The floor is yours, Bob.
But before I ask my question, this is, I just have to note this. Interestingly, on other meetings that I've attended as the chair of the Planning Committee and Committee of Adjustment, more often than not, I do have to sign in twice to go to meeting to either be heard at all or stop sounding like a munchkin. So that interesting that happened tonight. So just by way of identifying that. So at any rate, sorry for that, and thank you for the time. I won't take a lot of your time. As someone who is, and because you're discussing this very soon at your meeting about filling the vacant council seat, and as someone who was interested in that, I took a lot of interest in the draft report that is on your agenda here. And my question and concern really is about the fact that it looks as though this draft, and with all due respect, was written in pre-pandemic times. And when you consider the draft or the policy, I want you to consider some things, and I'm asking you, for example, and I'm looking at page 4 of 6, which gives the rules, and I've highlighted why it's saying submitted in person to the clerk by October 7th. C, original documents must be brought to the municipal office along with the application package. E, electronic submissions shall not be accepted. Paper submissions with original signatures are required. So my question is, and I think you've been holding these virtual meetings for 1.5 years now. Everything that you do in them is completely legal. We've all probably participated in things where you either scanned a document and sent it off, or took a picture and sent a JPEG. Our Mayor John Creelman, former Justice of the Peace, can tell you that a signed document emailed is now considered a legal document. I am not a lawyer, and that So when you're considering this, I'm asking you that really electronic filings are more than acceptable these days, and I'm asking again why this is mono going back in time to the days when everything has to be done in person. So that's my question. Yes.
But would you be content to allow us to discuss your issue when the matter is raised under unfinished business?
Mayor Creelman, absolutely. But I did want to attend here so that this is recorded in the public domain. And with that, I'm asking that question. And now I'm going to thank you for your time and to defer to you. And I'm going to mute and log off and listen to your discussion. I think that that's the best way to do it.
I think we can assure you that we'll address your concern when we discuss the clerk's report.
Okay, thank you very much, and have a great meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the public who are listening? Seeing none, next item on the agenda is unfinished business and deferred items. And we have, first of all, a list of unfinished and deferred council business, which has become a standard feature of our council agendas. Are there any questions or concerns about the list that's before council? Councillor Mankala.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have some concern that we don't have due dates by some of these items, and I think that probably it's possible. So I'm asking if I guess it's Mike, the second one about the Brookfield Properties water treatment plant, if we could have a due date for that. And I'm also asking Mark if we could have a due date for the procurement policy for professional services. That one's been going on for about a year now, and I think that it's important that we have a feeling for where these projects are, and we have, even if it's hard to put a date down, to at least try and estimate it. So those two, I'd like to see due dates.
Mark?
Yep, sorry. I didn't know that it was a question, or it was just asked to bring it back, which I was fine with. So you're looking for a 5-year plan for procurement? I mean, that was what council asked for, was a staggered procurement of professionals and contracts that we've gotten. As you're aware, through our in-camera discussions at the previous meeting, we're certainly on to that. But if you're looking for something over the next 5 years, I can certainly put that out for you.
Councillor Mankala?
I confess that I've kind of lost track of how where this is going, Mark, and that's what the direction I was asking for.
Well, the larger contracts that you were looking for, obviously, legal, engineering, water, some of the other smaller ones. Obviously, we've done dogs this year as well. But we could certainly, and the thinking of council was you didn't want them all to come back all in the same year, 4 or 5 years from now, that you wanted them scattered over time. So we've been kind of picking them off as we went, but I can certainly put together an estimate of where they should fall.
Thank you.
I think the objective here is to come up with a report to council on how we would be staggering them, which would go first, second, third, whatever, so that we have target dates for going with RFPs or other processes. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I just should report on the very first item, the joint water management agreement. Mark did get into, just to back up, we were sent what I thought was a draft of the agreement that we were supposed to have in effect by 2018. It was sent by the Credit Valley Conservation, and Mark and I replied with some, what I think were some very good suggestions, and we sent it to the neighboring 3 other municipalities in which we have to get into an agreement with. Now, by the email traffic since Mark has sent out, so our understanding was that Chris Garrett of Amaranth was going to, he's the representative on the Credit Valley Conservation Authority Board and also the Source Protection Authority. We thought he'd sort of take the ball and run with it, but what we've decided to do now is have a meeting. And Mark, I just would like to tell my fellow councillors, by looking at the email traffic, I'm just a little worried. We're getting staff and other political people in on this meeting. It's getting fairly large, and I'm just afraid we're going to be back at reinventing the wheel as to what we did in 2017 when I thought we had this issue all settled. I don't need any feedback from council at this point. I'm just bringing you up to date as to where we are. By provincial mandate, we were to have that agreement in place by 2018, and it certainly isn't us that are holding up the process.
Councillor Mankala.
Through the chair, with respect to my second item, which is the Brookfield water treatment plant, it may be that we're waiting for the forensic analysis. I think it's about 3 years we've been waiting for this forensic analysis, and it's taking an embarrassingly long time to come to us.
Mark, any comments on either of those 2 items?
Well, I think the forensic, I think we've discussed that with council before, the likelihood of getting the forensic report is probably going to be a long shot, given that there's been a lawsuit, I think, between both Brookfield and the provider. So whatever's there may be proprietary. We're certainly willing to bring forward everything else with regards to the treatment plant. It hasn't occurred over the last month or so because the Ministry of Environment has been pushing Brookfield very, very hard to bring themselves into conformity with their certificate and the plans that they have filed. And I don't know, Mike, if you had anything further than that, but that's Gary Tomlinson at the ministry is involved and has had meetings with Brookfield as well. So it has gone beyond us up to the ministry who have issued the permits and the certificates for that plant.
Just with addition to the upgrading to come into conformity with the certificates that were applied to the ministry for, Brookfield has tendered for the installation of the 4 remaining septic beds. And that was to close sometime over the previous week. And we're expecting to hear back from Brookfield with respect to the results of that tender and potential timelines. And with respect to the forensic, Mark, you were bang on with basically having to hire a forensic analysis of the plant. They would essentially have to tear it down and put it back together and come up with the potentials for the failures. One thing I can tell council is that the RBCs were upgraded as part of the failures that occurred. The different bolts, different lock washers, and some extra armature steel angle iron was added to the RBCs. So there has been some movement with respect to the failure, and some upgrades have occurred, and we're working through that process. But I think, Mark, you're right that it's a long shot on the forensic analysis due to proprietary reasons.
Now, that being said, we can certainly bring back to you what has been filed with the ministry by Brookfield, and it's probably going to be another couple of weeks because it would be nice to have the ministry's feedback on it when it comes back to council.
If I can make a further suggestion, if there's lawsuits out there, you may learn a lot from the statement of claim and response to statement of claim, and those are public documents. Just a suggestion.
Yep.
Anything else on our to-do list? One item I'd like to speak to is found on page 3 of 4, and that's the motion with regard to establishing a small working group consisting of a member of council, a realtor, and a member of staff to develop some messaging for prospective buyers and renters of property in Mono. And Sharon Martin has expressed an interest potentially in serving on that group. I'm certainly prepared to do what I can to assist, but I'm wondering if we could informally agree to deputize Councillor Martin to perform that task. I see concurrence. Congratulations, Sharon. Yes, Mark?
Will Sharon be bringing forward a name from the real estate industry that she'd like to work with then?
I have already mentioned a name, but I think that there are a couple of other people out there that maybe we could talk about. I'm looking for somebody, of course, who would be familiar with Mono. Of course, living here would be a good idea. If not, somebody who sells a lot in Mono, somebody that we can, a name that's familiar to us, and that we, somebody that has a big interest in local.
Dave, I see you're there.
Thank you, Mayor Creelman. I mean, I'm at council's disposal here. I could certainly mention names, but I don't want to preempt what council members may choose to put forward at this point. I think it's important that the brokerages play a role, frankly, because then they can disseminate to all of their realtors, you know, what we're trying to achieve here through this motion. That'd be my comment.
That's the objective. I think we should just leave it to Sharon and Dave and Mark to thrash out who the real estate representative would be. I certainly know of a few names of people who I think would be anxious to serve, but I didn't intend to settle that issue here tonight. I just wanted to see if everyone was agreeable to Sharon doing the job. Great. Anything else from our list? Seeing none, no takers. The next item is the filling of the vacant seat on council procedures, and this is a report of our clerk. And I have a motion to get the debate going that we approve the filling of the council vacancy policy as further amended during this session and direct the clerk to follow the procedures specified in the policy to fill the existing vacancy on the town of Mono Council. Do I have a mover for that? Moved by Deputy Mayor Nix, seconded by Councillor Martin. Discussion. Yes, Brad.
Okay, I brought this subject up once before, and I'm not going to push it if no one else agrees with it, but can I just repeat one concern I had? We're going to ask applicants to apply for a position. In all likelihood, the last time Mono did this, I think there was 7 or 8 applications, and if that's all there is this time, there's no problem with my concern. But let's just suppose that we got 20 applications. And given the timelines that Fred Simpson has outlined in his process thing, it could be a very long meeting to hear 20 applications, 5 minutes each for their presentation, and 2 questions from each councillor is 8 questions. you know, it could go on for a very long time. I just would suggest that on other committees that I've sat on, for example, the Shelburne District Fire Board, where we had something like 35 applications for fire chief, or when we were hiring the chair of the Source Water Protection Authority up at the NVCA, you know, we get quite a number of applications. We've always used a screening process. Now, I know there's a concern with that on the part of some that, hey, if we had a screening process and say we got 15 applications and we pre-screened them and only allowed 8 to appear at the special meeting on October the 18th, it is possible someone would say, hey, you made a decision outside of a public meeting. I don't know the legality of that or what it is, but my suggestion was going to be this. If there are more than 10 applications, we do a pre-screening. And I think it could be very simple. I just jotted this down it's just one possible idea. That on October the 8th, the day after the applications have been received by the clerk, all 4 of us get copies of the applications. Go home that night or that day, we read them all, and we give them one of 3 possible scores. We should, the A score would be we should hear from this person. The B score would be that we're not sure if we should hear from this person. And the C score should be this person just isn't qualified, so we don't need to hear from them. And then the clerk could take the 4 results from the 4 existing counselors, and I think he'd do something like this. Any applicant who got an A score from any one of the 4 of us would be appearing before council. Any applicant who got 2 or more B scores would also appear before council. But all the rest of the people, i.e. the people that got C scores from all of us, we would just pre-screen and say we're not interested in hearing from them. Now, I don't know, and Fred Simpson, I would ask you, I mean, I know we have to make all our decisions in public meetings. Would a pre-screening process like that violate the rules? All I'm hoping here is that we narrow it down to the people who we really think are interested and qualified to be counselors. I put that idea out, Your Worship, and I asked Fred Simpson a question. I'm not going to push it if none of the rest of you like it, but it was my first thought on Fred's process paper.
Fred?
Does council want to discuss the options before the long and short of it is I cannot give you a definitive answer. Council has the opportunity to come up with a process on their own. It's in no way regulated through any legislation on what this process is. So it comes down to the appearance of being fair and equitable to everyone who applies. Using an election campaign as an example, the only pre-screening is the requirement to each candidate to come up with 25 nominees for their application. If council wants to go along with a process like that, there's a possibility. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but there's a possibility of concern being expressed by residents. And I can't give you a more definitive answer than that.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I sure overwhelmed them.
Mark, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether you still want to reflect a possible screening process in your guidelines so that you're not challenged on it down the road. It could just be a very simple statement at the end, depending on the number of applicants. A screening process may be utilized. You're talking about something we don't even know that's going to happen. And I'm wondering whether if you've got something like that in your policy, at least you thought of it, you covered it. And if it does become an issue, you do have the council meeting on the 12th to deal with your regular council meeting in between the last day of applications and the day before and the week before the special council meeting. I know it's Fred's process. I hope I've been looking at a small portion of it. Hopefully I haven't stepped on something else within that would create a problem.
Ralph?
I think it's not a bad idea. That's a backwards way of saying I think it's a good idea. We should leave, I think, the process open. We should. I like Mark's idea that we include this in the process document, and we can decide at our next meeting. If we've got 28 applicants, then it's going to be not going to be a good process for. I won't be able to remember after the 14th applicant what the first one said. So I think that we should have this as a possibility. The exact way it's going to be, appreciate you coming up with this grading system, Fred. I'm not sure we should approve it, but we might use something like that.
Sharon?
Yeah, I agree. It's best to have it there just in case those 28 people show up. That's probably a good idea.
Can I suggest a possible wording that we reserve the option of pre-screening in the event of a large number of applications? Leave it as open as that.
Yeah.
Good.
Does that sound good?
And your worship, should we write out what the screening process is for our next meeting, or do we have to have that detail?
I think we can wait on that to see how many come through the door, either in person or by way of electronic means, and that's another discussion. And then put together the process. But I think if we have a general statement that we're preserving the option to pre-screen, at least it's in the policy. I should indicate that I've been part of processes where pre-screening is essential, because sometimes we would be dealing with 800 applications for 5 positions, and of necessity we had to pre-screen. So Fred, does that sound good?
Certainly, yeah. We can put in a statement like you said. The general points I just wanted to bring out tonight were there are some other things I think may want to be discussed. The process of the interviewing doesn't have to be as prescriptive as I've laid out in that policy. It can be more flexible. I've put down something very prescriptive as a means of trying to control the length of time spent with each candidate. But that's open for council to discuss. Just like the idea of ranked ballots, that there's nothing that states it has to be a ranked ballot when voting on candidates. Nor does it have to be a secure vote. A secret vote. Again, this can be an open vote if council wishes. The only thing I was hoping to come away with this evening was enough information to actually put together a policy, either tonight or to bring back the next meeting. And the only reason is, I think it may influence some people if they're going to apply or not, to know what the process is before they make their application. I think that would be an influencer for some people if they say they do like or don't want to go through a particular process, that they know that early enough that they can still make application before the deadline. So that does give the next meeting, the February or the September 28th meeting, to finalize things. But I think a number of people will hold off making application until they know what that process is.
Fred?
Yeah, then if we're discussing Fred's process, his paper, and we're also going to discuss Bob McRae's concerns, but on Fred's paper, the only thing I thought, Fred, it was maybe a bit too rigid, is saying that each counselor would be allowed 2 questions and the applicant would be allowed so much time to answer. I would actually prefer to leave it a bit looser than that, and I would leave it up to the mayor of the special meeting you know, to ask each counselor, do you have any questions? And they've got one, fine. If John thinks we're really on to something, you know, it might take 3 or 4 questions. Sometimes you don't get a complete answer, or you get a vague answer, so you want a follow-up question. I just would leave it to the discretion of the mayor to make sure that the 3 other councillors don't ramble on too long, and he can keep control of the meeting that way. So I would just make that one section, Fred, a bit looser than you have written it.
Okay. So to the mayor's discretion, I think works fairly well as opposed to that prescriptive means. And I think it's easier to go from prescriptive to general, which is why I wrote the report that way.
Ralph?
Right. This is embarrassing, but I agree with Fred. That's the second time this meeting. The other question I have for Mr. Simpson is, you've listed ranked ballots. I'm wondering why.
So here's the problem that any election process that potentially has more candidates than electors is there is no way to guarantee you don't have a hung jury, right? So you've got 4 people voting. If you get a 2-way or a 4-way split, you can't get out of it. So the idea, and even ranked ballots can't solve that. So the idea was just to have 2 different processes. So I was recommending ranked ballots because there is a slightly less chance of a 2 or 4-way split. But if it did occur, then there is a different voting technique to break it. Though it might not be broken. You could still, even with that process I've suggested, still end up with a hung ballot. But that was my reason. But if you want to just simplify it and just have one, whether it's a first past the post, you know, simple majority, or a rank, there's no problem. But council's going to have to think of how are they going to resolve a tie if it shows up.
Okay, well,
I
appreciate your comment there. I tried to read up on this as I did when we discussed ranked ballots and decided not to use them earlier this session. It's a pretty complicated thing, and there's many different varieties of processes, models. So you have some decisions to make, I think.
By you mean council has some decisions to make.
I mean,
I have some recommendations.
For example, you could make the rule that you have to vote on every single person there, or you could only vote on the first 5 or something like that, or you could do whatever was your choice. You need to have that settled before you start if you're going to have be able to evaluate the results. And then I noticed about 5 different models that have been described for evaluating it. So I'm okay with it if you're okay with it, but it seems to me that it's going to be could be potentially confusing. I know there are ranked ballot calculators out there as well, and maybe you can arbitrarily decide to use one of those.
Well,
you're saying as a problem with the first past the post, particularly if we have quite a few applicants.
So I was recommending the ranked ballot system that was going to be instituted for municipal elections. And that lays out a very prescriptive method of how that happens to avoid just that issue. So if council goes with ranked ballots, that's what I would recommend because those rules are already established.
Fred, next.
Yeah, just to refresh everyone's memory, the last time this happened in the town of Mono, it was a secret vote, and each of the 4 councillors had 1 vote, and Keith McNenly was our CAO, and he pulled the ballots out of a hat, and the first vote went to Bob Shirley, the second vote went to Bob Shirley, the third vote went to Bob Shirley, and the 4th went to Bob Shirley, and as Keith said, so much for a secret ballot. That was just to refresh everyone's memory, Your Worship.
And I do want to comment that a secret ballot does complicate things when it's done as an electronic meeting.
Yeah, I think we need to think long and hard about whether the vote is secret or not.
Well, Your Worship, I'm going to feel awkward if I hate to say it, have to vote in public, because I suspect I will know some of the candidates. And I know the last time it didn't turn out to be a secret ballot, but if you're sitting there, you've got 5 people you've heard from and 2 or 3 that you know fairly well, and you've got to make a choice. I'd prefer to do it. Couldn't we just send the clerk an email with our votes?
Sure.
Sure. But it may arise as an issue, and what I wondered about was whether the Municipal Act gives us the discretion of having a secret ballot. The only one that I'm aware of is the election of a warden in a county.
Well, except, John, I just told you that the last time this situation happened in Mono, we had just what was supposed to be a secret ballot.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking out loud here of whether it ought to start out that way and end that way. Fred, is that an inquiry you can make as to whether the Municipal Act gets in our way, or whether we have pretty good discretion on the mechanism we use to fill the vacancy, and maybe that covers the issue?
Yeah, that's my position on it, is that there is the Municipal Act doesn't lay out any rules on this, and the other municipalities within Dufferin that have gone through a similar situation in the current term have employed secret ballots.
Okay. Okay. Are there any other comments before we turn to Bob McCrae's issue? So Bob has raised the question of whether or not electronic submission is possible. Brett, do you have any thoughts on that?
I didn't recommend any electronic submission because I'm basically following a process for a normal municipal election. Now, having said that, the Municipal Elections Act will permit the electronic submission of ballots in the 2022 election if procedures are established by the clerk in advance. And in all honesty, there just hasn't been the timeline to research and what those procedures are that would stand up to that level of scrutiny for a municipal election. That level of scrutiny is probably not quite so high for this, but nonetheless, I'm uncomfortable going down that road without having the time to further research it. And that's why I've gone with the tried and true method. Town hall is open. People are allowed to come in. We're accepting, people coming in and exchanging of documents. I think as far as the COVID side of things, I think it could be well handled. The inconvenience side of things, that's another matter. That's a question for council. Inconvenience for the candidates.
Did anyone else's phone go off? Mark? Mark?
Yes,
Do you have
Sean?
something?
No, you said, did anyone else's phone just go off? I just put my hand up. Sorry, John.
Another Amber Alert noise.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on whether or not this should be we should have an allowance for electronic submission? I certainly think that the package could be sent out to a prospective candidate. Question that I'd ask is whether or not they could submit it electronically and follow up with a mailed version of the original documents. Or Fred, do you need to see such things as photo ID and so forth?
Yes, I do need to see confirmation of ID and address, something that ties, both together for proof that that they're an eligible elector. And, you know, you've all been through the normal nomination process where we review those sort of things, and then I sign off at that time as having received it, dated and timed. So, you know, and all of those are solvable. I just haven't had an opportunity to establish those protocols that would be rigid enough to, like I say, to withstand the scrutiny in the timelines we've had, because we may use those for the 2022 election.
Fred?
Yeah, I think Bob McCrae makes some very good points, but given that our office is now open, there's a hand sanitizer down on the stairs, there's a requirement to wear a mask, documents can be slipped under the, what do you call it, plexiglass, nothing that Fred has proposed is different than we are now allowing the public to enter this building. So I don't know why we shouldn't go with what Fred Simpson is proposing.
Yeah. Sharon?
Yes, I totally agree with that. I think the office is open. We've moved a bit forward. That's a good thing. And particularly if somebody wants to withdraw their name, it might be a really good idea if they showed up in person. Somebody who didn't want them to be there could show up and say, or could mail it in. But I'm kidding, of course.
Ralph, any thoughts?
Sorry, I'm muted. I'm fine with what Fred has outlined. Paper's fine this time. I don't think it's a big disadvantage for people.
Okay, and we are in a different phase of COVID restrictions that I think we need to be mindful of. He makes a point that a lot of this is done in the normal course electronically, but I don't see the appetite to alter the recommendation. Is there any further discussion of Fred's report? So the motion that's before council does take into consideration as further amended during this session. And I'm not certain. Yes, Councillor Mantilo.
We did discuss the question of ranked ballots, and I'm not sure whether we made a decision or where we are on that.
What's the wish of council?
I'm happy with giving it a shot.
Fred?
As am I, as long as the clerk feels that he can handle the process and he has some process in mind. I mean, I think he raises a very good point when you have only 4 people voting and you have, what, 8 or 9 applicants. What if we all vote for a different person? It's a hung jury, and it just doesn't work. So Fred Simpson has come up with a process that would get us over that hump, and I think if he's willing to use it, we should go with it.
Okay. People comfortable with that? So the only amendment to the policy is building in an option to vet the submissions in the event of a large number. Is that your understanding, Fred Simpson?
I was actually going to just go through the couple of items just to confirm. So ranked ballots is a yes. Secret ballot is a yes then as well?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah.
Yes. The process for interviews will not be as prescriptive. It will be to the mayor's discretion for how long an interview goes on. That's agreed. Okay. And then a process of vetting ballots in the event of, can council establish a criteria at the very least on when council would consider using a vetting process?
10.
10 or more?
10 or more applications.
Okay.
Are people comfortable with that?
And that process won't be laid out in the policy then, it will just be noted that there will be some process. Is that?
Yes, we may want to revisit the number 10, but I think we need to preserve the option of a vetting process in the event of a large number, and I'd leave it fairly general of applications.
Okay, so we're not going to say can, we're just going to say at large or some other adjective.
Excessive.
That's good. Excessive, see there, I was, like I said, looking for that other verb. But
Can I ask a
Fred?
question, Your Worship? Fred Simpson, there is a potential possible problem here that once you've received all the applicants by October the, where was 7th, you said a list of them is going to be put on our website. Now, would that, if there was 15 applications, would you put all those names on before we did the pre-screening? That might cause some people some embarrassment. Should we say you're only going to list the applicants if there's pre-screening process used? The public list of applicants would only be those who had made it through the screening process.
I can rewrite the policy, taking out the section that says they're going to get posted. So there's the only hiccup on that, is that right now when someone submits their papers, that name gets posted so others can see, right? And then after the deadline, the list is made official. And that's the normal process for an election. So if we hold that list until after the close of nominations, no one else will know who's submitted their nomination. Plus, we've also said people could come in and look at the nomination package. Again, that doesn't have to occur. That's just kind of mirroring the normal municipal election process. So that could be rewritten such to meet what you're suggesting, Councillor Nick. Sorry.
I would ask my fellow councillors, I mean, if we publish 15 names and pre-screen it down to only 10, isn't that going to cause embarrassment for 5 people?
Well, I think Fred's got a good point.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've got to find a way of holding off the publication of names until we determine whether we're pre-screening or not.
Okay, so if I just change that policy to state that the official nominate, so names aren't going to get published then until sometime the week of the 11th of October or later. Right? We accept nominations, they're certified by say 4 o'clock on Thursday, the 7th of October. That list goes out to council. You have the weekend. We post it early the next week. Does that work for council?
Yeah, it would.
And if someone
Yeah,
calls in, someone says, I'd like to know who's applied. Wait until the list is published on or about the 11th of October.
Very simple.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else before I call the vote? Any opposed to the motion before council? Motion is carried. Next item on the agenda is a report with regard to the composition of the OPP Detachment Board. And you're probably all wondering when this will go away, and maybe tonight we can make it go away. As the memo indicates, it turns out that we are now the outlier insofar as our original proposal, and yet our original proposal in terms of the composition of the board that we wanted to have ourselves is preserved in the Grand Valley motion or suggestion, and they are now requesting, and I think it's appropriate to give them a motion that supports their position, and hopefully the province will see its way clear to adopting it. Is there any discussion of this before I read the motion? Yes, Fred.
Yeah, I'm all fine with it. I just wanted to double check on one thing. If you go to the where it says the composition of each board, so when it says 3 Orangeville Council, 3 municipal appointees, it's understood that the 3 municipal appointees are appointed by Orangeville Council, correct?
Yes, and likewise, our layperson would be appointed by us. We are presuming that hopefully the province sees the light and doesn't insist on having its own people on police service boards. But if they do, that's nothing we can do anything about. Any other discussion? So I have a motion, whereas further discussion and consideration of the OPP Detachment Board proposal put forth by the town of Grand Valley on July 20th, 2021, and to support a made in Dufferin proposal supported by all municipalities in Dufferin. Therefore, be it resolved that Mono Council hereby supports the proposal, which will consist of 4 OPP service boards as follows: Town of Orangeville, Town of Shelburne, Townships of Langton, Momer, and Mono, Township of Amaranth, East Garifraxa, and Town of Grand Valley. Do I have a mover for that motion? Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Councillor Magdalow. Any further discussion? Any opposed? Motion's carried. Next item on the agenda is the development charges bylaw and interest rate policy, and is Les nearby. Here he is. Over to you, Les.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the bylaw that is before you is the exact bylaw that was part of the Watson's presentation along with the study. They did in one of their slides mention an interest policy. The policy is one that is recommended by them and has to go along with the DC bylaw. And the policy will get amended every time we amend, or not, maybe not amended, but at least reviewed every time we update our DC bylaw. It's pretty standard stuff.
Any questions of Les? So I have a motion that we introduce and give the necessary readings to a bylaw to amend bylaw 2019-42, being a bylaw for the imposition of development charges, that it be signed by the mayor and clerk for the town of Mono, sealed and engrossed in the bylaw book, and that we approve the development charges interest policy dated September 14th, 2021. Do I have a mover for that motion? Deputy Mayor, pardon me. Deputy Mayor Nix, seconded by Councillor Magdalow. Any further questions or discussion of the proposed bylaw and accompanying report? Any opposed? Motion is carried.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Les. Next item is a report of the clerk with regard to internet telephone voting agreement and provision of internet voting services. Fred, do you have any comments on your report?
So this is essentially an identical agreement to the one that Council signed 4 years ago for the 2018 municipal election, with the exception that the cost for preparing and mailing out the voter letter has gone up, as was noted in my report. And there's an added clause that if the provincial or federal government delays the election, then Intelivote will still provide their service with no additional fees or charges. Otherwise, it's the same as last time.
Any questions of Fred? Fred, I do have one quick question. Would it be your intention to have a computer located at Town Hall that people could use to cast a ballot?
Yeah, I imagine I'll run it pretty much identical to the last time. So during the advance polls, and they are, it's quite a few days of advance polls, we set up a voting terminal in the outer boardroom and had staff available during the entire day to assist people to vote. And then on election day, we set up a number of voting terminals down in council chambers and with a couple of staff positions to assist people. That part has to be slightly reviewed to ensure we meet, whatever the COVID protocols are in 13 months from now. Otherwise, I see it happening similar to that previous election.
Okay. Any further discussion or questions? So I have a motion that we introduce and give the necessary readings to a bylaw authorizing the town of Mono to enter into an agreement with Intelivote Systems, Inc., substantially in the form as attached, as Schedule A to the bylaw for provision of internet and telephone voting services for the 2022 municipal and school board election, that it be signed by the mayor and clerk for the town of Mono, sealed and engrossed in the bylaw book. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Martin, and seconded by Deputy Mayor Nix. Any further questions or comments? Any opposed? Motion is carried. The next item is an add-on that has made it into the body of the council agenda, having to do with a report prepared for the county of Dufferin with regard to adopting a vaccination policy. Do we have any discussion of that document? Deputy Mayor?
Yes, I'm fully in support of it, and we're not doing the policy tonight. We're just giving employees a notice that it will come into effect, and we're going to let the county, in consultation with the health board and I think the town of Orangeville, develop the work. They've got HR people. The only minor tweak for the town of Mono that I would like to see is that councillors be lumped in with staff, that the policy also applies to them. I know if this was discussed at county council, councillors are not considered employees, so the policy as they are going to write it will in fact cover us. It doesn't really mean anything for Sharon, Ralph, John, or I, because we've all been vaccinated. But I think the policy should say that we have to, as to staff, simply to show leadership.
Mark?
I'm just going to say at the end of the day, you're going to get to a point though where you're going to face, possibly either vaccinate and accommodate or vaccinate and terminate. There's a lot of issues still up in the air. And if it turned out that you wanted to, at the end of the day, go to say a vaccinate or end up terminate, working through that process, you can't, council could not be part of that process because you're elected officials and we would not have the authority on that. So there are some reasons for separation. It doesn't mean it can't be put in the same document, announced at the same time, but there would have to be some minor nuances in how the policies are applied.
Deputy Mayor?
Can I just ask a question, Your Worship?
Yeah.
Mark, I hear what you've said, and you're basically arguing that because we're elected officials, we couldn't be terminated. But isn't there some rule that if a councillor doesn't show up for X number of council meetings, that the mayor can get rid of that person or something? Isn't there some rule about that? I mean, all my point is there is some way to get rid of a councillor. And I would say if we had a councillor refused to get vaccinated, and you sent him through the education sessions, and he still refused to get vaccinated, he should be terminated. He or she should be terminated.
I'm saying from an administration perspective, we don't have the authority to do that. So I think it's something to work through with the policy. I heard the discussion at the county as well. I know there's concerns being expressed by some other councillors as well. So we'll see where we can end up and have some common ground.
Do we have the authority to dock pay?
Of council or of staff?
Yes. Of council.
Council.
It's probably going to be your policy, so I would think yes.
So if we can't terminate a councillor, we can dock their pay until they comply with the policy.
Excellent idea.
Harsh. It's harsh, but I think it works. I have anyone else first before I jump in? Yes, Councillor Magdalene. You're on mute.
Thank you.
There.
I'm supportive of a mandatory vaccination policy. I think it fits with our general approach to our community. The actual details of the policy need to be worked out. I think we can use the policy that the county comes up with as a template. We should look at it and then customize it to suit ourselves. There are some details in it which I think are, to me, they're important, and we need to, such as how frequent we do the testing if somebody's not vaccinated, who pays for it, etc. Well, I think we should use the county's policy as whatever they develop as a template, but we should definitely look at the details and customize it to suit Mono. I would suggest at this time that we announce that it's going to happen, as the county does, on a certain date. The November 1st is probably suitable, and that gives people who are not vaccinated or have had just one dose a chance to take action. So those are my two thoughts.
Any other thoughts? I was just going to say that the prepared motion speaks to working with County of Dufferin to develop and implement a vaccination policy. The one aspect of what we debated and approved at county was a timeline, and the timeline was basically that people would be fully vaccinated by November 1st. The reason for that date is to give everybody notice that it is going to happen and sufficient time to get a first and a second shot, and 14 days to have that shot do its job. And as it turns out, November 1st is a date that accommodates that schedule. I think that should be part of our motion tonight, and that in the meantime we work with county staff to address the details, such as who pays for testing, frequency of testing, and consequences if and I believe there should be consequences for a failure to comply. Any thoughts on that, Mark, and so far as amending the motion to adopt November 1st as our expectation date?
I have no concerns with that. I would suggest that you would add a line and take it right out of the report from the county CIO, and that proof of vaccination status or proof of medical exemption or proof of exemption under the Ontario Human Rights Code will be required by November 1st. So that's right out of this county CIO's report.
Is council agreeable to that? Just one observation, and we did have this discussion at county, and that is if there is and there was a suggestion that exceptions on the basis of human rights argument would be considered on a case-by-case basis. And point was that I didn't want to see our senior staff put in an awkward position of making those decisions. That kind of decision really needs to come from the Human Rights Tribunal. In other words, if they come up with a protocol for dealing with exceptions, that's what we adopt, not a case-by-case review that awkwardly puts our senior staff in a position of having to say, that's a legitimate excuse, but that isn't a legitimate excuse. Would you feel better about that, Mark?
Yeah, I was
wrestle
comfortable with that. I thought that was something that the county staff were going to be building into their template, so to speak. So,
The
like,
way
I
it
don't
stands
think-
now,
Sorry, Your Worship,
Sorry,
I
I was gonna
interrupted
say,
you.
the way it stands now, they are going to be assessing, for want of a better term, human rights exceptions on a case-by-case basis, and I thought that was fraught with difficulty.
Okay. Well, we can.
Ralph. Oh, sorry.
Go
I was
ahead,
going to
Matt.
say we could certainly pursue you avenue, Your Worship.
Okay. Ralph?
One of the items that's giving some jurisdictions in the states quite a bit of work right now is the exemption on religious grounds. Is that being lumped under human rights, or is that another separate separate area?
I suspect it's under human rights.
Suits me.
The medical exemption is clear cut, and that's obviously a doctor's note or certificate. But beyond that, I think it gets a bit murky. So I'm just wondering about the wording of this motion. Fred, have you been listening in, and can you suggest some language that adopts the county's timelines, while at the same time directs staff to work with the county to develop and implement a policy?
So taking the CAO's suggestion of lifting a line from the county's resolution, that would add a third paragraph at the end that would say, and that proof of vaccination status or proof of medical exemption or proof of exemption under the Ontario Human Rights Code will be required by November 1st.
Is everyone agreeable to that? I don't see any objections. Proof of exemption under the Human Rights Code will be, I think, problematic if people are picking up the code and reading it and saying, hey, according to paragraph 10, I'm exempt. Short of that being tested before the commission, it may put us in an awkward position, but I think we cross that bridge when we get to it. Okay, if there's no further questions or comments on this, I have a motion that whereas Council has reviewed the vaccination policy report prepared by the County of Dufferin dated September 9th, 2021, and therefore be it resolved that town staff be directed to work with Dufferin County to develop and implement a COVID-19 vaccination policy in consultation with the Wellington Dufferin Guelph Health, Public Health, and the third component would be as Fred just read it. Does anyone require that to be reread? Any objections? Any objections to passage of the motion? Seeing none, the motion is carried.
Excuse me, Your Worship, maybe I missed it. That was moved and seconded, that motion?
My apology. Thank you very much. I see a mover, Deputy Mayor Nix, seconded by Councillor Mantalo. Not any opposed? We did a rerun on that. Okay. Thank you.
And Your Worship, if I may interject, to answer your earlier question, if a member of council is absent from meetings for 3 successive months without authorization, council may declare that seat vacant. So 3 months without authorization, council can kick someone off of council.
And I would argue if a councillor went 3 months without getting vaccinated, we should kick them off council.
I think the docking of pay would stand a better chance of being sustained on a challenge. But this is a moot point because we're all vaccinated. Okay, last item under the heading is filling the board appointments previously held by Laura Ryan. And those board vacancies are the Rosemount Fire Board and the Central Dufferin Recreation Center. Is there any discussion about those vacancies and any volunteers? Deputy Mayor?
Well, my assumption is we just have to fill them until we fill the vacant council seat, at which point we may want to put the new councillor on some of those boards. My second suggestion is the Rosemount Fire Board, I would ask Ralph this, but I think it could survive with one Mono representative. And in terms of the central, the recreation center, I haven't talked to Sharon, but I would ask Sharon, could you fill in there for the next meeting? That would be my suggestion, Sharon, if that's not too onerous.
No, that would be fine for that meeting.
I think the mayor has frozen up on my screen.
I think you're right.
I'm still here. Am I still here?
Oh, so your face is frozen.
Oh. As long as I'm not grimacing.
No.
Your mouth is open.
Okay.
I'd like to comment on that, Your Honor.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we're fine with just myself at the fire board, as I don't anticipate any critical votes coming up. That would be the only reason for wanting to have a second person. I think it is good to have somebody at the recreation center, and having Sharon there, that's a good idea. And I think it's really a very good opportunity for somebody who is new on council to experience these two boards, as that's a vital part of council's agenda or work. So I'd like to leave them open until the person is appointed, and then we can consider their possible appointment to both boards.
Okay. Is everyone in agreement? So we will dispense with the motion to fill the vacancies. Schedule A. Any questions or comments about any item on Schedule A?
I forget.
Oh, Fred?
Did you want to try to tackle the newsletter now before moving on to Schedule A? That'll probably take you up to 8:30 when the in-camera discussion is scheduled to commence.
If council's wish is to turn to that item, I'm happy to do so. I think everybody received a copy of what I proposed to substitute on the prepared newsletter, and I gather from Fred that it's not a big deal to cut and paste, and the newsletter will not be delayed. Is that still the case, Fred?
Yeah, based on the changes that you suggested, Your Worship, we being Andrew, can institute that easily and within the timeline.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, just to put some historical context on this. First of all, I think John, the mayor's comments about council being more involved in the newsletter are very, very good thoughts. And I think historically, when we first started doing a newsletter, council was a bit more involved, but basically, what's the correct word? Abdicated their responsibility and more or less turned it over to staff. So that's, John, how we got to where we are today. But I'd be quite happy to follow up on your suggestion. If it doesn't make staff's life too difficult, that I think if councillors wanted to contribute something to the newsletter, we should have that option.
Councillor Mankalo?
I think that it's worthwhile us being more involved than we have recently. I've made a couple of inserts for pollinator garden, otherwise not much. If I could suggest some process that would involve council might be appropriate, such as 2 weeks before the deadline for having the newsletter put together, that council gets informed that there's a newsletter coming out, say on April the 14th, and if you have any subjects to put in, then now's the time to offer them. So I think that's part of the problem, is that we need a little bit of lead time to recognize, oh, it's newsletter time again.
So
Freddie's
if I may.
Yeah, there you are.
So Andrew does send out an outline of what the timings are well in advance. For example, this newsletter started, I think it was August 20th or thereabouts. So we'll ensure council is included in those. And then he sends out a couple reminders through the process. Be forewarned, Andrew is a brutal taskmaster, and he demands and expects that people meet his deadlines.
Yeah, I'm content that we have more involvement of members of council. That's a great thing, and I know that was once the case, and I think it can be the case again. And subject to a good timeline that gives us the opportunity to suggest topics and involve ourselves in any writing. I guess tonight I'm just looking for support for the substitution of my content as submitted to everyone. And I also created a separate box for the process of filling the vacancy, because I think that needed to be highlighted and not buried in the lead, as it were, of the article.
I agree with
Yes.
what you've done. I agree with what you've done, John. And before we go in camera at 8:30, I'm going to take a bio break.
Thank you. Any other comments before we have a 2-3 minute break?
No, good.
Okay, I see Jeffy's with us. Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Would you permit us to have a 5-minute break?
I'm at your pleasure.
Okay, let's reconvene at 8:35 thereabouts. That's actually 7 minutes.
And we are back.
Thank you. And we're resuming with a motion. The council move into a closed meeting pursuant to section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended at 8:37 p.m. For number one, a matter of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, Ontario Land Tribunal mediation, and number two, matters of litigation or potential litigation, bylaw enforcement update. Do I have a mover for that motion? Moved by Councillor Mankelo, seconded by Councillor Nix, I believe. Deputy Mayor Nix, you're going to shoot me, Fred. Any opposed? Seeing none, if we can go in camera and terminate the feed for the moment.
Guys.
Yeah. Thank you. And I have a motion that we rise and report from an in-camera session at 10:07, and that council accepts the advice from the town solicitor and directs the town solicitor to proceed accordingly. Do I have a mover to that motion, the deputy mayor? And seconded by Sharon Martin. Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion is carried. That we accept Schedule A to this agenda. Is there any questions or comments on Schedule A that couldn't wait until next? Okay, I need a mover and a seconder that we accept Schedule A to this agenda. Moved by Councillor Mankelow, seconded by Councillor. Opposed? And finally, that we introduce and give the necessary readings to a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of Council of the Town of Mono in session 19-2021 held on September 14th, 2021, that it be signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed and engrossed in the bylaw book. Do I have a mover for that? Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Martin. Opposed? That motion is carried. Is there any news or anything that we've missed in our determination to try and beat the weather home?
I guess
Seeing
you're,
none, I have a motion. Oh, sorry, I'm rushing too fast.
I guess item 8, reports of members of council and staff projects. We're going to pass on that.
That would be my recommendation, given how late we've run. And I would like to have a have a perfunctory motion sort of after the fact that we continue to sit past 10 o'clock. Do I have a mover for that? Moved by Deputy Mayor. Oh, sorry, Mark.
I think you only need to do that past 11, Your Worship.
Oh, it's 11. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
that was 10.
I'm just trying to find my binder. I can't find it quickly, Your Worship. So if you want to do a motion just to cover yourself, feel free, but I'll find that for you.
It is 11 p.m.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Craig. I have a motion that we adjourn this meeting at 10:20 p.m. I have a mover for that. Councillor Mankelow, seconded by Councillor Martin. Any opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for your patience this evening. Have a good and safe drive home. Thank you, everyone.